Is Modern Classic the same as Classic was back in 2019? When Classic WoW launched, it changed the gaming landscape in a way that probably won't be changed again till GTA 6. Yet Classic WoW started a divide in the player base, retail versus Classic, and as of this moment, almost 6-year-long argument on which version of the game is better. That question is subjective, but the bigger question of the recent years has become, what is Classic? Everyone draws that line separately. Some people draw in a more harsh line and others are more fluid. When I interviewed the developers of the Classic dev team recently, they said that the definition of Classic is fluid and everyone has a separate endpoint in what that is. And the community and forums agree. But that leads us to the biggest problem of all, Modern Classic and what it is. At its launch, Classic WoW was meant to be a nostalgic and iconic retelling of a story that started back in 2004 and of a version of the game very few people played and got to actually experience. It essentially doubled the sub numbers of WoW, showing the then Blizzard that they were wrong. "You think you do, but you don't" is a meme that's been beaten to death, but it still holds true. Millions of people flocked back to play Classic WoW, and it was amazing how things progressed from there. The stories, the memories, the large number of boomers who relapsed after quitting back in OG Cataclysm, and by the end of Classic, when Nax was on farm, GDKPs were spread across the board, we opened a portal to step into Outland once again. And TBC, despite being one of the better expansions, was full of whining, with people loudly saying, "I can't wait for this to end to play Wrath of the Lich King," or "TBC is mid," and other terrible takes. And don't get me wrong, people enjoyed the shit out of TBC Classic, but people wanted to rush through to Wrath of the Lich King. And then it happened. We got to Wrath Classic, which was hype beyond measure, and everyone and their mother came back to try it. But this time around, Naxxramas, despite being a recent raid, wasn't as fun, because far too many people remembered clearing Naxxramas just under 2 years ago. And as Wrath of the Lich King went on, the player base kept dropping. Ulduar and then ICC chipping away at it. Then Season of Discovery happened, and that chipped away even further at the player numbers. Despite Wrath of the Lich King supposedly being the crown jewel of the OG Classic trilogy, by the end of Wrath of the Lich King Classic, it was down to a fraction of the player base. From Naxxramas' peak of 630,000 active raiders, all the way down to 80k. A drop-off was expected, being the end of the expansion, but nobody expected a drop-off as severe as this. Okay, that's a lie. Everyone did. People specifically said that if Ulduar and ICC lasted this long, people would quit. And then Blizzard let it last that long, so people quit. Which then brings us to where we are right now, just after the launch of Cataclysm Classic, which has garnered a supposedly large population. But for how long? Because what is Classic, or in this case, what is Modern Classic meant to be? Some people have started to call it Classic Progression, a version of the game where people get to live through all the expansions all over again, allowing them to experience what the games were like, or at least something similar to the original launch experience. Cataclysm not so much, because where did the pre-patch go? I could have swore that there was a pre-patch. Anywho, I'm not here to debate whether or not Cataclysm is quotation marks Classic, because that's a personal discussion. This video is solely about the fact of Modern Classic and what its long-term goals are and how will the player base react to it. Because if the sole goal is to be a continual re-release, aka Classic Progression, are we all prepared for Shadowlands Classic in 10 years, especially with the accelerated phases? And is this what the player base wants? I know certain people want certain expansions, for example Legion, and I won't deny that certain elements of certain expansions are amazing, but is this a sustainable game model for Classic as a whole? And is Modern Classic even meant to be a high investment game mode? Or is it meant to be a game mode that's available so that people have access to another version of the game to play alongside retail WoW, alongside seasonal WoW like Thunderstorm and WoW Remix, and then the Classic era and its myriad upcoming seasons? Because to me, Modern Classic seems like a new way of gaming. It's a way to play Classic where everyone gets to play Classic the way they want to play Classic. And with Blizzard and Microsoft's new goal being as many players with as many game modes as possible, it's honestly not a bad strategy at all. Because a lot of people quit during OG Cataclysm, and it was touted as being the expansion that started the fall of WoW. But so far, it's not that bad. It's a fun game, it's a decent expansion. I'm sure it'll do well and keep a healthy player base at least for some time. Heck, Mr. Pandaria Classic, the expansion that's not confirmed confirmed, but it's essentially confirmed, will almost definitely have more players than Cataclysm Classic. I'm sure there's a portion of the player base that's just waiting for MoP Classic at the moment. And MoP will definitely be fun, as its PvP is considered to be the best, if not one of the best versions of PvP in WoW. So Blizzard continuing to release all of these expansions back to back fills in a niche and gap that retail and Classic itself was lacking. A new experience and a way to get Classic player base as a whole to interact with the retail ecosystem. Especially as retail WoW continues to become a better game, more and more people will be interested in trying it out. And this isn't some grand conspiracy. Blizzard isn't making modern Classic so you eventually quit and play retail. They're making it so they have more MAUs. If by chance you dive into the retail ecosystem, that's just a double whammy. It keeps you invested into the World of Warcraft ecosystem. Boredom is a thing of the past when you can just jump back and forth for one singular subscription. And retail and Classic are becoming closer and closer. Cataclysm Classic and each new expansion afterwards in the Classic progression system will keep getting closer to retail. And Season of Discovery is, as much as some people are loath to admit it, retail light. Very light and more Classic than retail, but it's still a touch of retail. At the same time though, Blizzard seems to have realized that you cannot satisfy every player base. Even if the player base shoves themselves into a game mode not designed for them and then complains. For example, we have Season of Discovery, Cataclysm Classic, Classic Era, and Hardcore. 4 similar game modes but different player bases for the most part. All of that is Classic, yet every Classic player plays the game differently. And tying to that very same notion, does the player base even know what it wants? Because one of the most popular things you can say is ban GDKPs. It's bad for the game. But at the very same time, the most popular game mode is GDKPs. And it's easy to make it make sense. People no longer play slowly, so everything has to have some value to them. It's very similar to how Chinese players play. Even if I don't win any loot, I get gold out of this, and that's at least worth my time. Now, I'm not going to deep dive that today because the GDKP question is a video all in of itself, but it shows that the very concept of Classic and what it was back in the day and the version we have today is drastically different. Vanilla players when compared to Classic players when compared to modern Classic players are essentially 3 different groups of people. The disparity between how each group of player played Classic has changed, and rather rapidly at that. And thus, we have where we are right now, a divided player base, which is honestly the only good solution that Blizzard has been able to come up with. Instead of catering to one group of people, they are creating so many different ways to play that everyone has a way to play the game that they want to play. Some retail players will play Classic, enjoy it, and then try one of the many Classic game modes, and vice versa. A Classic player will try WoW Remix or Plunderstorm and realize, hey, I actually like this, and then try out retail. Because Blizzard has realized that in this modern day and age where every game is a live service with a battle pass, microtransactions, and more, everyone is competing for your $20 to $30 a month. So most people are locked to one ecosystem till they get burnt out and jump to another game. And thus, modern Classic, where you don't get burnt out. You get sick of one game mode, so you just jump to another and play that. Because even when they make Classic Plus, and they will eventually, whether or not you and I consider this eventual game mode to be Classic Plus is irrelevant. It'll get made and it'll just be another game mode, however big that is, that locks you further and further into the World of Warcraft ecosystem. Because Microsoft's MBAs could not give a singular shit if you play retail, hardcore, Classic, or what else. They're looking at MAUs and they're repeating Game Pass or the Blizzard. Why would you play a different service if everything you're looking for is on one singular subscription? So this is not just modern Classic, but it's a modern World of Warcraft, and honestly, it's a pretty goddamn bright future as a World of Warcraft player. I know some Classic players might hate this idea in future because in their mind their favorite version of the game isn't getting the time or attention they think it deserves, but for World of Warcraft's long-term health and survival, I think Blizzard has made a very smart choice. If you like this video, subscribe. If you hated every second of it, subscribe and hate my next video. Check out my Twitch. I use a whiteboard and go on massive conspiracy theories. Thank you, Ebonhard out.